And good evening. This is the Steve Mazzacane podcast. Glad to have you here. Our guest this week will be Vin Candelora, State Representative Vin Candelora. But before we get to that, just some house cleaning stuff. Our sponsor for this week is Building Concepts. It's a company in Branford, Connecticut. Those of you that know me before I started doing media 15, 16 years ago, I went to trade school for cabinetry. And so and I ran a kitchen design company in downtown New Canaan for a long time. So working with Building Concepts was kind of fun. It's a kitchen and bath company. They do sunrooms and other things as well. But I really like working with them for a reason that they, one of the biggest complaints when it comes to kitchens and bathrooms is that contractors don't get back to you. And Jim is amazing. He's been doing it for 20 years. It's located right next to GW Carson's in Branford. Give them a call. Go to their Facebook page. Send them a message. If you're looking to do a bathroom or a kitchen, I'm telling you, really good people, Jim and Brenda, and they get the job done and really experienced there. So give them a call. The second thing is, and I forget this every single time, so I have to keep reminding myself, subscribe. If you're on our YouTube page, subscribe to our channel. Like, comment. If you have a question for our guest this week, comment below. We'll try to get him to answer that later if that comes along. And if you see us on Facebook or Instagram, like and share that as well. I appreciate all the support we can get. So I make a mistake every time I have a politician on, especially to start the conversation before we go on camera. And I did that today with Vin. But Vin, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I've covered you to a certain extent for like 10, 12 years now, and I've never actually had you on to sit in front and have a discussion. But, a few weeks ago I posted about Medicaid, and I want to start having a little bit, before we go much further, I do want to say this. I didn't know your brother, but I'm sorry for his passing. I've heard amazing things. I saw all the posts. Very sorry to see that.
Thank you. I appreciate
that. I'm sure
that.
He was a great guy. I wish I got a chance to meet him, but it is what it is. So, but Medicaid has been part of the conversation. And one of the posts that I made was about, are there people out there who have access to health care that are using Husky and on this program? We have this big, beautiful bill coming from Trump. We've had Sean on. He's talked about it from the Democratic perspective. Talk first of all, what do you see as the impacts of this new bill on health care and Medicaid in Connecticut?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of moving parts to that bill that we're still trying to understand. One of the areas that I do know that's going to have an impact for Connecticut is in the hospital tax. There is roughly, I'm going to throw out loose numbers, but about 25 states that have a tax on hospitals. We implemented it back in 2009 when we had the Great Recession. We were scrambling for money, and it was under the Malloy administration that realized that we could actually tax hospitals, and the Medicaid, the federal government would pay that tax, and in the jinkering of it, you could make the hospitals whole, and the state makes money. We were bringing in about $600 million a year, and in this past budget, the Democrats, the governor, sort of unilaterally contemplated a new contract that would bring in $900 million total per year. The hospitals balked at it and said, your number's off. You got to reduce it by about $100 million. But in the course of all of this, the big, beautiful bill caps it at about 6%. So we're going to have to try to make up that loss of revenue, which will be about probably $300 million. Philosophically, I understand what they're saying. You shouldn't be taxing hospitals. It's not the way we should be generating revenue.
And it's kind of a game, right? We tax hospitals, so they have an extra charge, and their charge goes to the federal government. So it's not, we're just taking federal government money, essentially.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's a scheme that we figured out how to get money. We should try to phase that out. I think, nationally on a federal level, that's not what our healthcare system is for. Every penny that we put toward healthcare should go into healthcare, not into taxation.
So that revenue we raise, that comes and just goes to our general fund?
It does.
So there's no earmarking it for anything healthcare related?
No.
So just so I get this clear, so the listeners get this clear, we tax hospitals a percentage. The federal government reimburses that amount, and then we take that tax money and then spend it on whatever we want to spend it on.
That's right.
Okay. That's wild, but it's okay.
It is wild, and it's interesting to watch. The fight happen at the federal level, We have our political football. So obviously healthcare is a fantastic political football on both sides of the arena. Trying to unpeel it and say, like, let's look at the policy and see what's best. Because no Republican or Democrat is going to want to go on record taking away vital services from people. They're going to protect Medicaid at some level. But there are areas of vulnerability, and that's one area that I think the states are vulnerable at losing.
Okay, but that money they lose wouldn't necessarily be going to their healthcare costs anyway, though. They're using that for whatever they want.
That's right. But it's a loss of revenue
overall
on the
loss
books.
of revenue. Okay, so that's part of the complaints I get from the left. So let's talk about Medicaid. So we have these new restrictions coming in. And the restrictions, yes, that percentage is one of them. The work requirement that we have to check every 6 months is another one. I keep coming back to the same question personally, and I've written about this, is that I think there are ways, certainly there's waste and fraud in the system. I can, in personal experience, name quite a few people at every restaurant that I know that deliberately work under the hours to stay under these limits, or make sure they're working in cash. And every client I have will tell you, people will come up and say, can I work 2-3 shifts for cash because they can stay under some certain limits. Are we doing anything now to enforce this?
We're not. I think there isn't a lot of oversight. It is one area that you hear about that there is fraud. And just in Connecticut, we've seen some of those cases recently be uncovered where, in particular, doctors are overbilling for services. But back in, I think it was around 2012, it came out of the Affordable Health Care Act. It came out of Obamacare, where able-bodied people were entitled to receive Medicaid if you hit certain income thresholds. That was sort of a new program that was put into place. And what's happened is it's been expanded over time, and we've ballooned to, I think it's costing the state of Connecticut over $300 million for that program. I think what the federal government is trying to get at is say, okay, we recognize that we have able-bodied people that can't afford health care, so they're going on to Medicaid, but we need to make sure that they're working. So they're not just sitting home, able-bodied, not working, and getting health care. And I think that's sort of what the federal government is trying to tackle, because I assume that other states like Connecticut is seeing that line item mushroom, and it's something that we just can't keep sustaining.
Do we have any evidence that that's a big number, that people are not actually working?
No, I think it's more anecdotal evidence of actually the situations where employees could very easily be put onto a Husky D program and have their salary capped, kept them at a level where they could receive those health benefits, when the question really should be, should that employer be obligated to be providing that level of health care for them?
So you'd favor having that employer providing health care?
Yeah, I think we have to look at it. And I mean, the global problem with our Medicaid in Connecticut, and the reason why I think we need to try to move people to private pay, is because we underfund the reimbursement rates for Medicaid. So hospitals, doctors, they're receiving 65 cents on the dollar for services they're providing. And you have an access problem. So a lot of private providers may say, I don't want to treat Medicaid patients because I'm not getting paid what I need to sustain myself. And then you have others that are getting supplemented by the federal government or the state government, like our qualified federally health centers, that are providing health benefits for Medicaid patients, but they can't sustain it. And in Connecticut, our private pay, it's been said is paying around $1.25 for that same service, because the private pay is now subsidizing Medicaid.
So normal health insurance is subsidizing because we're only giving 65% of the dollar.
So we have to right balance it somehow.
How do we do that?
Well, I think, most recently there was a study that came out in Connecticut that said in order to balance out Medicaid, we need to increase the rates, and it would cost the state $115 million annually to do that.
Okay.
So my caucus put out a budget that actually funded that. So we raised the rates and we put 115 million into that program. The budget that actually got passed put about 15 million in. So we're still just falling very far short of fully funding Medicaid. And I think that drives fraud. I think there are, organizations that will try to nickel and dime the Medicaid program to get more money out of it because they can't sustain the level of reimbursement rates.
Oh, so you're saying it's fraud, but it's legitimately trying to make up the shortage that they have because they're not getting paid that money.
That's right.
I mean, we hear all the time that people cannot find doctors. Especially they won't take Husky or they won't. That's happening on a very regular basis. So here's the question that I come back to. We talk about Walmart and the subsidizing that happens at Walmart because so many of their workers have access to Walmart insurance. I'm using Walmart just as an example, but there's many other ones. They have access to it, but it's hard to compare anything with free. So if they're getting Husky for free, why would they spend $50 a week for a copay or $100 every 2 weeks, whatever it is for the Walmart copay? Is there a system in place where we can say, I'd rather pay that copay for them? Does that make sense? Is it something that is possible?
So I would love for that to happen, to look at that policy, diving deeper. We need to do a benefits cliff analysis. So there are organizations out there that could look at it. And we should be looking at those kind of situations, even getting rid of the cliff. So people who can work and increase their income levels don't all of a sudden find themselves losing all their benefits. And frankly, that's what happened when the minimum wage was increased and then graduated to inflation. People earn too much now under minimum wage, and they will lose benefits. So people cut back their hours.
So is it all or nothing? So when we talk about a cliff, we're saying, suppose the number is $40,000. That somebody making $39,900 gets all these benefits. And at $40,001, they lose everything. It's not graduated at all.
That's right.
That seems fairly obvious. That's crazy.
It should be obvious. It's something that, I've talked about, I've pushed. It's funny, we have a lack of data on understanding that information. And sometimes I think it's intentional because we don't want to have that difficult conversation, but we really should, because you want to incentivize people back to work. And that is one way. And I hear it anecdotally from people. They say, I can't go out and get a 40-hour-a-week job. I'm going to lose my benefits. And I had that conversation as recently as 2 weeks ago with a friend of mine who earns up to the limit so he could stay on Husky D because he has a disabled child. And,
so
it's just a reality that I think Connecticut could get itself out of that crisis that we're seeing if we look at these benefit cliffs and start allowing for people to earn at the same time they don't lose all those benefits.
And so, like, your costs, you may have a small cost as you make more money, but it's not an extra $20,000 for health insurance.
Yeah, you're always benefited
by
working a full 40 hours a week.
No, we had situations here in Brantford. A girl was working, she had done well, a bunch of overtime, and then it came to end of September. And the next day just never showed up. Like, they just stopped showing up. And employers will tell you this. And that's when all the questions, can I work for cash? Can I cut my hours back? Because they have to stay under that threshold. I am a little confused as to why it seems fairly obvious that it should be some sort of ladder. Why are the Democrats fighting that?
It's just, and it's not necessarily like legislative Democrats. The governor's office, back during COVID, well, actually it was pre-COVID, when we had the fiscal crisis, we were tied in the Senate, we were close in the House, and we got to the point where we were looking for savings to negotiate. It was one item I did put on the table, and it was just summarily dismissed.
What's the downside?
I think part of it is it's a much more complicated system to implement. And if you can't implement the current system efficiently, I think they're afraid of even trying to do something more complicated.
Okay, so the changes in this big, beautiful bill, the work requirement, it's not so much a work requirement as just requiring the state to check up more often.
Right.
Right, so that's going from a year to 6 months. What are the other significant changes?
That's one of the big ones that,
Yep.
the DSS pushes back really hard on that. And, we've talked about this. Frankly, they can't review the current caseloads that they have. So we have the PCA program. Less than a year ago, we had a problem with paying out the employees for the personal care attendants. What I had found out, and in talking with people, we have people's cases have to be reviewed every year in order to qualify for the Medicaid benefits, and those reviews don't happen. So we're out of compliance at the federal level. If it's reduced to 6 months, we are going to have a huge compliance issue in Connecticut. So that would be the concern, is making sure that we have employees in place that could actually review these cases in a timely way that the federal government requires. Because if you don't, you lose the funding. And I think, I'm critical of the fact that Connecticut, our employees still work from home. I don't know the metrics that are being followed, how successful they are. And I think that's part of the challenge, is making sure that these case reviews happen. And even in the SNAP benefits, I think the error rate has to be 6% or less. Connecticut has been high as 10% in their
So
their
in the
error
new
rate.
bill, 6% is the cap.
I believe
So the
so.
bill says, like, here's your benchmarks. There could be some mistakes. We get that. But up to 6%. And if it's not, you lose these benefits.
That's right.
Do we have the staffing? Forget the new bill. Do we have the staffing levels now to implement the current standards correctly?
I don't think we do.
Okay, so one is staffing. The other might be that there's some working from home, and they may not be giving us, common sense may tell us they may not be giving us the output.
I think the problems with working from home is, you don't get the information you get at the water cooler. So it's hard to train workers. I've had employees in my caucus who've left for agencies, who've come back or have told me how horrible it is. They're sitting in an empty office. They don't have the interaction that they have in the legislative building. And so they either come back and work for me, or I get complaints. And
What's the thought process? I mean, COVID is over. Why is that?
so
not
the
being-
unions took that to arbitration. They won. And so the arbiter ruled that state workers are entitled to stay home 4 days a week, and they only need to go in the office 1 day a week. So we have office buildings in Hartford that are empty. And you'll hear about office space in Hartford's collapsing. I mean, that'll be the next issue that we're dealing with. It was ironic. We gave to the Capital Regional Development Authority an entire office building on Farmington Avenue this legislative session because we're not using it anymore. And that's sort of the best kept secret right now in Connecticut.
So let me get details of the secret. We gave them what's the size of this building? Any idea?
I thought it was it might be 7 stories. It's a sizable office building that housed many different agencies.
Okay.
I believe the Regional Development Authority will be converting it to housing.
But we're not. It's not that we're not using that building because we have less employees or we cut employees. It's that the employees just are working from home.
Correct.
Okay.
We have fully renovated, brand new office space that's empty.
So
And the impact it's had, if you go to Hartford, the restaurants are struggling, the food trucks are struggling. They're finally coming back a little bit. The parking lots are empty. It has a huge economic impact to the city of Hartford.
But I want to just looking at this big, beautiful bill. So there are these new stipulations that we have to make sure that people are going from, instead of checking them every year, which we're not doing now, we're reducing that to every 6 months we have to check for SNAP benefits, for Medicaid, what have you benefits. But we're not hitting that number now. We still have the same number of employees, they're just not coming to work. No one has stopped and said maybe we're not getting the level of efficiency from our workers we should be.
Yeah. I mean, and I don't want to suggest we're not, but
Yep.
that analysis hasn't been done. And so, we've had even our child advocate, the Office of the Child Advocate, who reviews DCF cases, when children are seriously harmed or
Okay.
killed in state custody who have cited the impact of working from home on the whole DCF program. But we continue to not, as a state, look at this issue. So I've put in a bill every year. I'm the sole person that testifies in favor of the bill, and I get upward of 300 to 1,000 state workers that testify against it and yell at me how
You're an
horrible
awful
I
human
am.
being. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't understand the not getting back to normal. What was the arbiter's thought process when they said,
You know, I don't recall. I think back when it was issued closer to coming out of COVID, but it was definitely post COVID, and I don't recall the details of the decision. But you know, there's a lot of things that don't make sense in government, and
I'm aware.
you know, people, you know, they enjoy the flexibility working from home. Personally, I think there's a lot of societal ills of not interacting with your peers. The learning curve isn't there, and I think the quality of work goes down in some areas. There are some things you could do from home, and maybe going to a 4-day work week, you could be more efficient. So I'm not saying we shouldn't look at flexibility, but I think our employees need to get back into the building, especially when they're new hires. You know, it's very difficult to train them.
And the private sector's done it.
They all have.
They took their time, and now they're all pushing people back to work. They have it serious. So I don't know why I guess if a court ruling was done or arbiter made that decision, and that would last until what? The union contracts are up?
Until they're renegotiated, or the legislature passes a law that says you have to come in.
Which is not going to happen.
No, one of the bill proposals I had was just to allow discretion for the commissioners to call you back in if they had a reason.
And that's not going anywhere.
I couldn't even get that out of committee.
Okay. So let's make you the majority leader for a second. So you're the minority leader now in the House. You become the majority leader. What steps do you take with this bill to help minimize people losing health care in some way, shape, or form?
With the federal bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I'm not sure the federal bill will cause people to lose their health benefits.
Okay.
I think the work requirements, much of it, people will already be in compliance. I think the biggest area is getting the hospitals into a room to negotiate a hospital tax that complies with the federal requirements.
Which is now a cap, right? So it's 6%.
That's right. Which we used to, you know, be in compliance with. You know, and the state has room. You know, we have surpluses. The money just keeps flowing. We have the ability to make the adjustments. The biggest area that what we need to address is increasing Medicaid rates. That alone would help. We're losing our specialty practices. They're leaving the state and going to other states. So they're getting educated here and then moving out. And some of the proposals is, well, why don't we create a program where we'll pay for their tuition to go and get an MD, and then if we pay for it, they have to live here for 10 years. You know, that's a clever way to force them to stay here, but we should ask the question, why are they leaving? And let's fix that problem. And some of that is the level of the inability to earn with our Medicaid population not paying out the way we do.
Okay, but you're really telling me that you solved that problem with $100 million. That would
But it
solve,
didn't have.
You put 15 of the 115 that you thought it took to level up the Medicaid reimbursement rates. $100 million in the scheme of how many billion-dollar budget?
It's all about prioritizing.
But how is that not a priority?
I don't know. It's something that the Democrats have not fully funded. I think we need to talk about it more so people understand it. But I don't know why that is not one of their priorities.
So we passed before the last election, because we heard it from every Democrat, that they passed the biggest tax cut in Connecticut history.
Yeah.
And now you're telling me that we are just just is a rough word, but $100 million short of reimbursing Medicaid at the right percentage. This seems a little crazy to me. What am I missing?
It's, you know, it's, there are confines that we have to work around. So we do have our spending cap, we have our revenue cap. We certainly had enough revenue, but it's where things get prioritized. And so the Medicaid rates is just not an area that has been prioritized. And I don't know why they wouldn't adopt and fully fund the very study that we commissioned telling us how much we need to fund.
But all we hear is that this bill is going to destroy Medicaid in Connecticut, and we're going to kick all these people off.
And Connecticut is doing it on its own without the bill. And
Sean did kind of allude to that to a certain extent, in fairness to him.
Yeah, I mean, it is happening a little bit. And, no question there are changes in the federal law. Do I like all of them? No. But there's a bit of hyperbole, I think, sometimes in gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's trying to achieve some laudable things. And, I also think in the bill what's being ignored is that the tax benefits to the individuals, especially for New Englanders who will benefit greatly from that bill cap. Just with the SALT cap raising it.
I mean, the SALT cap helps those that are working class people that typically own property.
Yeah.
For the most part, and who pay. But I mean, for the poorest individuals, for the working poor, we're not talking about the people who are fraudulent, the people who are actually working, Walmart, McDonald's, whatever it is. It does seem to get a little bit tougher for them.
Yeah, I mean, potentially it can with the Medicaid pieces, but so I don't think it's tougher for them. I think it's going to be tougher for government.
Okay.
Because I think those individuals are going to receive the benefits. It's will the state get reimbursed for giving those benefits?
And if we don't,
we fall short. We fund it. So these laws are in place saying you're entitled to X, Y, and Z. What the federal government has now said is you're still entitled to X, Y, and Z.
If you do,
but state government, you need to do your job and make sure they're entitled to it. So if the state governments fail in doing that, people don't lose their benefits. The state ends up having to pay for those benefits in lieu. And it's similar to the undocumented health care. The feds, which we were worried about, is the feds are going to penalize states who provide health care to undocumented immigrants. That could have cost the state of Connecticut upward of $800 million if we were penalized. They didn't do that.
Okay.
What they said was, we're not going to give you any federal money, which is the law anyway, currently, and you could keep doing whatever you want. So Connecticut is continuing with their program for health care for undocumented. It's health insurance for undocumented.
Do we know what the average cost of that, annual cost of that is?
So that's been a moving target. The House Republicans, we looked at the numbers. We went to DSS. We talked to our Office of Fiscal Analysis. The number that we received was about $116 million. The program is costing us. And that's a health insurance program for 0 to 12-year-olds and then for pregnant women. DSS has now said, no, it's only going to cost us $40 million. We'd love to see why that number got reduced. But bottom line, so it's anywhere between $40 million and $116 million that it's costing the state of Connecticut.
And that's specifically for children 0 to 12 and pregnant women.
Yeah, it goes to 15.
Okay.
I think this current budget year, so it's going to cost us even more money. There's been a push to raise it all the way to 26 years of age. I am
not
going
to get pushback on that. I mean, I have a hard time believing the general public would have a hard time saying, legal or not, a pregnant woman shouldn't get coverage.
Right.
And I granted, yes, we understand somebody could show up at the emergency room and get coverage, but they should have their prenatal care. They should have all of the things that you would normally. So I think from a public perception standpoint, 0 to 15 would be okay. 0 to 26 is going to be a different story. We have working, able-bodied people at 18.
Right.
Should be getting free benefits.
Yeah, and it's how you fund those benefits, because should individuals be getting, full dental, prosthetics, full prescription coverage, and not have to put a dime in. When my brother was first going through his cancer treatments, it was costing him $3,000 a month for his prescriptions.
on top of his insurance.
And the doctors say if you're on Medicaid, it would all be free. That's rough, And
No, listen, I have heard stories of people who will manipulate the system to have a year where they make less money,
right,
to get their dental implants done, to get all these huge things done, and then go back to get off of it and get back. I mean, there's no question there is fraud in the system. The question is how much. And, is it logical to think that there's 10 to 15% fraud in the system? I don't think that's a crazy number.
yeah, I don't either.
I don't think that's nuts.
I mean, back in the day, we're going back about 16 years, they were estimating the number upward of 30%.
30% fraud.
Now, I don't think it's that high, but
that was a few decades ago. But so you have the question of, is there fraud in the system? And then there's the question of, are the benefits just too much? And I don't think anybody would argue that they are not enough. I mean, everybody would say who pays for really good insurance on their own does not get what some of these husky people get.
That's right. And part of the problem that Connecticut is running into now is an access problem. Because we are not funding the reimbursement rates, you're waiting 6 months to a year for a doctor. And so what we're seeing, too, is these concierge physicians popping up. So now if you're wealthy enough, you could pay a higher level, a premium, and you're going to get a different level of health care than somebody that can't.
Call back at 2 in the morning. I know some people on it. It's crazy.
Yeah.
No, it's amazing. But if you were to find a way to cut that 15% fraud, so if we added 500 people to the system to check on whether or not there was fraud or not, and we cut down these 10, 15%, wouldn't that pay for itself?
Yeah, it certainly could. No question.
And what am I missing?
Well, I think at the same time, in looking to cut fraud, you really have to address the reimbursement rate. Because I'm a little cynical in saying this, but I think if you're a healthcare provider, you are squeezing that system as much as you can.
But one will pay for the other. If you cut the fraud, that $100 million you're looking for.
That's right. You could put it toward the rates.
And this isn't happening. Why?
Well, and that's going to be the interesting problem, because the feds, the way this bill is written, I think the feds are going to force this conversation.
So I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, I'm sort of reserving judgment on that part of the bill, because I think we do need case review.
I mean, I have asked Democrats and Republicans alike, and some won't answer on the record or on camera, but everybody agrees there's fraud. And I ask, do you think there's 5%? They say at least. I say, do you think there's 10%? They said very likely. If there's at least 10% fraud, what do we spend on Medicaid now?
The
ballpark,
roughly $6 billion, I think, even more than that.
So you're telling me you can
600 million, yeah.
So what am I feel like there's some math here that I don't know if politics is getting in the way or just intelligence is not getting. I mean, what is causing people to not say, okay, forget the government for a second. Why didn't we do this on our own?
Government in general doesn't need to be efficient. I
guess that's true. Yeah,
it's not
there's
incentivized.
No level of accountability to be efficient
for a lot of stuff we do.
But I look at people individually. I look at, I know the locals. Sean Scanlon, very smart guy, knows his stuff. Christine's very intelligent person. No, these are smart people. Ritter is a smart guy. Why, before this big, beautiful bill, didn't it make sense to look at things like this? Like this should have been done years ago.
Yeah, it should. And there was always pushback on that. It could
From
be
who?
Could be special interest groups. The administration, they don't think they could handle that type of caseload. So I think this is one area that this bill is going to force accountability.
Is there areas in the bill you don't like or you're worried about?
I mean, specifically, I don't know enough about it, but the area I'm concerned about the hospital tax, the way it's written. Connecticut we could foreclose and lose all of our money. So that's just an area that I need a better understanding of. I think all in all, it ended up becoming much more benign. Frankly, it spends a lot. Some of the tax cuts are pretty substantial. I'm surprised even the SALT deduction went as high as it did. But I do think it does help New England out. So it could be a good thing in the long run. But
And I do question the people who get to $40,000 in state and local taxes are not the poorest people. I mean, it's middle class. They're doing fairly well to get to that point. So, but if the theory is tax cuts help promote the economy, then maybe that'll help pay for itself. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, and I think in Connecticut, we dealt with the past serenity tax, and we had structured it in a way to try to get around the SALT cap. So I know raising it to 40,000 could help small businesses, people who are sole proprietors. So that might be what it's getting at. But all in all, I think it was an important piece. What's frustrating for me as a Republican in a blue state is watching our Democrat federal delegation completely trash this bill as being the worst thing that they ever saw in their life. And locally, our reporters aren't saying, of course you excluded, but aren't saying, what is the good things in the bill?
Yeah.
Because these guys all voted against probably one of the biggest tax breaks for New Englanders that we've seen in a long time. And why isn't that a good thing? Why isn't that provision good for Connecticut?
I mean, to play, and listen, I've been critical of especially Chris Murphy because I agree. Everything that happens, the sky is falling. And I think that's nonsense. However, I think the argument is going to be that, yes, this helps those that are working and, quite frankly, doing well the most. And I'm not talking about even millionaires. Like if you're working and you've got $300,000 coming into your house, which a lot of Guilford, not North Branford, but Guilford, Madison does, for example, they're going to get more money in their pocket.
Yeah.
I don't know if they need more money in their pocket, but they're going to get more money in their pocket.
Well, I would say, a $10,000 SALT cap is very low. So, like in North Branford, the average homes,
you're there at the
we're there,
property tax. Yes,
and then
that's
with
true.
the cars, so it is middle class families that are benefiting.
Okay.
So I think it's going to be, I've heard numbers of upward of 45% of Connecticut residents would benefit, and I think that middle class bracket is getting crushed, and especially with COVID. I mean, my house, which is a colonial, 2,400 square foot colonial. My taxes went from $9,500 to $11,800 in 1 year because of reval. So the SALT deduction is going to have a real impact, especially on these communities that went through reval, where you literally saw your house value go up 40%.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So there are some good things in it, but again, being in a blue state, we're only going to hear about the bad.
No, I mean, I look at the bill and I've gone through many of the features as I could, and I think my conclusion was the federal government wants you working. That's it. Like, and if you're not working, it's not going to be good for you. You have to prove why. You have to support it, which doesn't seem crazy to the average person. Like, if you're going to get a bunch of free stuff, no one's going to have a hard time if you are disabled. No one's going to have a hard time if you legitimately cannot work or you have something. But if there are people, and I think it's not people who are necessarily not working. I think there's a large number of people who are underworking to make sure they manage to get these benefits. And it'll be interesting if the department is able to get to that.
But that's where we have to address the benefits, Cliff.
Yeah.
Because there are people that need to underwork because they lose those benefits.
And I see that. So part of, obviously I do this, but I have a lot of marketing clients that I talk about, and that's a complaint all the time.
Yeah.
They get, especially restaurants, can I work under the table for the last 2 months, 3 months of the year? Can you not show this? Even this, the no tax on tips doesn't help nearly as much as people think. Because at the end of the day, the people who weren't making enough money weren't paying any taxes anyway. And the rest, if they're close to a cap, they're not going to report it anyway.
Right.
They don't want it on the books. So it sounded nice. Doesn't actually do much
I
at the
agree.
end of the day. Okay, I want to talk about another major issue, and that is housing. To everybody watching this who knows me, this is my pet issue. I've had it for a very long time on affordable housing. We had a bill that I did not like in any way, shape, or form. And quite frankly, the bill I have issues with all affordable housing, but even that bill felt like somebody, shook up a Yahtzee cup and threw stuff out and said, that's what this bill's going to be. There was no rhyme or reason to this bill. I'm sure you were not a supporter of the bill, and then Lamont came through and he did veto it. Where do we stand now?
So right now, it's still in negotiations, which Republicans are not a part of. I have reached out to the governor. He said he's going to reach out to me when the time is right, but I think we need to be part of the conversation. That bill, when you talk about shaking up a Yahtzee cup, when you craft a bill with 187 legislators and you say, okay, in the House, I need to get to 76 votes in order for the bill to pass, and I'm going to shop the bill around, and you need, 19 in the Senate. How do I get to that number? And so you had a lot of people saying, if you put this in the bill, I'll vote for it. And so that's why you had this bill that really sort of lacked direction. It looked sort of like Frankenstein.
There's no cohesion.
None at all.
I couldn't tell what the goal of the bill was.
And it was all slapped together, and I think that was a product of that process. That was a bad process. It was behind closed doors, sprung at everybody. I think it was a Thursday or a Friday. We had the weekend to try to mull it over. Couldn't get many changes because if something was taken out, that was someone's ask who was going to vote for it. We really need something that's going to be more consensus building and bring in the stakeholders. Everybody has a lot of good ideas, and they need to be heard.
So let's start with the overall premise. Now, this premise goes back years, and this has been happening. And I've written that it's more the inner cities trying to push people out of those cities. There's a theory that I kind of understand, not saying I agree with, but everybody goes to New Haven, for example, makes all their money, and goes back to their towns and doesn't have to deal with the Fair Havens and those that are needy or what have you in their area. So can we push those people out? The argument I would make is it's the Madisons and the North Branfords and the Branfords and the Guilfords that are paying for the school system in New Haven, and the ECS dollars are being forced there, and that's where all the money is going. So I think there's two sides to that coin. But here's the question. I mean, why would any legislator outside of those cities vote for any housing bill? Why would you force your local planning and zoning to have to take in something that the area doesn't want?
Well, and the way that bill was drafted, and not even taking something that they don't want, but tell them how they're going to do it. We enjoy local control. We have home rule in this state, and it's alive and well.
Yes.
To take an overlay and say each community needs to support X amount of housing, regardless of what the geographics look like, and hold them to that number is why I had a lot of pushback. I look at North Branford. We would have to double our housing stock under the fair share proposals in a community where a third of the acreage is water company.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. We don't have the infrastructure to be able to build that densely. We would have to take away people's property to build on it. To create a system where commercial could be converted to residential as of right.
As of right, yeah.
When, we passed an environmental justice bill about 5 years ago that recognized the fact that, especially in our cities, housing developments were put in commercial zones that might be pollutants, and children end up with asthma by higher rates in the cities. So we created a structure that tamps down on that process. And then here we're going to throw that out the window and say you can convert and put an apartment building next to a smokestack.
That was an aspect that Lamont didn't have a big issue with. That was my biggest issue. I'm like, how can you ask a town by law they must form a plan of conservation and development every 10 years? You must go through this process. You have to have public hearings and get public input, and all the stakeholders come in. And then you can say, but if a developer walks in and he wants to put up housing, take your POCD and shove it.
Yep.
How does that make sense?
It doesn't. It ignores it. In our town, most of North Branford is in a conservation zone. Okay. And we actually fought because if where Route 80 is near where the sports complex is, that was all in a conservation zone, which makes you ineligible for any state grants for any kind of development. And we say, this is crazy. You should be more prescribed in the areas of a community that could be developed. Certainly along state highways where there's sewer and water and gas, that makes sense for denser development. And our state didn't even do that. So we have areas that are in conservation zones that really shouldn't be. But then at the same time, this bill just blew that up and threw it out the window.
I mean, some things, the transit district made sense to me in the past when
Absolutely.
we developed those. You're near a train station, which we underfund our trains, but that's a whole other story. But it made sense. You're usually near infrastructure, near 95, near a highway, all that kind of stuff. That makes plenty of sense. To say a town has to have a certain number, and then to say they don't get to count most of the housing that naturally occur. I mean, most people don't realize that there's naturally occurring affordable housing.
Yeah.
That is, it fits in the financial bracket, but it doesn't have a deed restriction and it wasn't funded by the government, so we don't get to count any of that. We've talked about this before, but this is where the media kind of gets to me, where they throw this word affordable housing out there. The person reading it thinks we're talking about just housing that's affordable. Really, what we're talking about is this legal definition. How do you fix that? How do you fix if the underlying causes and terms we're even using to push this issue don't make sense?
It's hard because it's been ingrained in people's heads.
I think it has.
And there is a lack of understanding. 8-30G and where sort of affordable housing came out of does not create the traditional notions of starter homes or affordable housing. And so we really have to start there and fix 8-30G if we want to move off of it, like the governor has done with the work, live, ride, and transit-oriented development, which I think has bipartisan support, depending on how it's written. We want it to be a carrot, not a stick. That that makes more sense. But I think until 8-30G is revised, this notion of affordable housing is really a false word. And I'm not sure that we'll ever see that changed. I was mentioning we did have reforms to 8-30G back when we were almost tied in the House, and the bill didn't get out of the Senate. But we saw bipartisan support to fix that bill because, as everyone knows, it is a developer's dream. It pits a town against a developer. They could squeeze something out of the community that might not belong. It creates a lot of bad blood when the process should be more cooperative, in a way that makes sense.
Well, and it should fiscally make sense. Like, it's not what happened. We saw this happen in Brantford. We've seen it many places. Developer comes in, they make a proposal with the minimum number of affordable units that they can in something, so they have a bunch at market rate. Then go get a ridiculous sum from the state to build it. They have profit in perpetuity that the state paid for.
Yeah,
and it just, like, why would anybody? And the person who runs Beacon, who does a lot of these projects, used to work for Chaffa. It seems a little crazy. And I think what
there's a lot of money dumped into those programs.
A ton of money. It's ridiculous. And I yes, there's a two-party system in Connecticut. There may not be because you just can't get there. But you'd think smart people in a room should be able to put up programs that actually make sense. Why aren't we getting there? Like, why do these bad ideas fester and end up becoming laws?
So, we have sort of a petri dish of intellects that,
okay.
They come together and the fair share is one of them. They came up with a model that they won't let go of, no matter how you try to educate, and they continue to barrel ahead with that model. That whole fair share was, it was under the premise that Connecticut is a segregated state, one of the most segregated in the country. And we don't have county government. So when you're doing census, they look at each town. If you look at Brantford, North Brantford, Guilford, those demographics are very different from New Haven. But when you go to other states, they're looking at the entire county, which is showing a very diversified map. In Connecticut, if we looked at our traditional New Haven County, it would show a very diversified map. But in Connecticut, we're looking at 169 towns. Some are very white, some are very dark. And so we run under the mantra that we are segregated. We need to desegregate our towns. And to me, that's not the case at all. We are such a small state. That's a crazy notion. There's a lot of overlap. But we do need to look at affordability because looking at the homes that I see that were going for, 250 as starter homes are now up in the 400s, which is unaffordable for people.
But so when a home goes from 250 to 400, though, it's because the demand for that home is so high. There has to be people that are. That's where
I don't understand the
Yeah.
market. I think part of it, we're seeing homes not going on the market as frequently, and so I think that the supply isn't there.
And that makes sense. The interest rate, if you have a mortgage at 3%, you're not going out there now at 7%. But things like Airbnb, things like corporations buying up homes,
private equity.
Are there any steps we're taking to limit that?
I think we've got to look at the impact of private equity in the market, especially apartment complexes. You're hearing more and more about these larger corporations. They come in, they run their algorithms. They could have vacancies.
They outbid everybody.
They don't care.
Yeah.
So it's a very different structure, and I think it's something we do have to look at. The hospital system, look at what happened at Waterbury Hospital in Prospect. That was private equity coming into the state, purchasing a hospital and strip mining it. Took all the money out, large bonuses went out the door, it's bankrupt. And Manchester Hospital, they own that as well. So we're trying to reconcile what happened there and trying to regulate private equity. At the same time, you don't want to squeeze it out because it could be helpful. But
but the idea of so many of 2 or 3 corporations buying up thousands of single-family homes and two-family homes, you're driving up the cost of things. And you're right; they could sit on it vacant; they don't care.
Right.
So that removes units from the overall system.
And the Airbnb structure makes it easier to rent out homes. So, we have one in our community that that was purchased by somebody from New York, and it's an Airbnb now, and they'll make 15. I don't even know that it's somewhere in the hundreds of dollars a day renting it out.
It doesn't have to be full time. They could rent it out for 9 months of the year.
That's right.
And be fine. And shoreline towns, that affects even more.
Yeah.
Because Brantford has a ton of these that has happened here. Is there a way to stop that?
There could certainly be a way to regulate it. I think that possibly giving our local communities the ability to do that, similar to condo associations, is giving towns the ability to regulate that type potentially.
And some have, you must have 30-day tenants that can't be it can't be every night, that sort of thing.
Or a minimum of residency, you have to live there 6 months and a day.
That makes sense. Is that something that you see coming up in the legislature?
I don't, it's not out there, and I think it needs to be teased out. I don't know the constitutional issues, but I do think that we are moving very quickly in the world of technology and AI. And I think we have to get comfortable at looking at how to regulate it on all different levels. And
there can't be a 4 or 5 year lag.
No.
We have to get smarter at figuring out what's going on and be able to react to it.
That's right. And the federal level, I actually joined, off subject, but one issue is the federal government trying to say, forget what the moratorium was, but putting a 5-year moratorium on any AI bills over the next, for any state. And that was a proposal. I think it was Ted Cruz that had put that in. I did sign on to a bipartisan letter that went to the Fed saying, don't do this.
You're basically saying we're going to handcuff ourselves for the next 5 years, no matter what AI does.
Handcuff all the states. Yeah. Right. Which I think is a 10th Amendment violation. But putting that aside, we have to move and pay attention to what is happening in that arena.
All right. Well, in the last few minutes, energy. I know this is one of your pet projects. So, who was
one of my pet peeves.
Yeah, I'm aware. Well, so talk about the woman heading up this organization that got put back on again. Tell me what's going on there, because I see your press releases and I see her keep getting on. So
yeah, she's just right now she's mired in lawsuits. I think the utility companies don't believe that we have a fair broker, that she's biased. The problem is that Moody's and the independent rating agencies have said Connecticut has the worst regulatory environment in the country. There's no predictability coming out of PURA. It's bringing instability to your market. They've divested from Connecticut. So we just have a crisis on our hands. And the governor has kept the pattern of more of the same. I would like things shooken up. We only have 2 appointed members on PURA. We have 1 person serving at the will of the governor and 2 vacancies. The law requires 5 PURA members. He needs to make it 5. And I've been saying this for 2 years. He's breaking the law.
We have 3 people actually serving now.
3 that are currently serving, but only 2 that have been reappointed. So you know what happens when you're serving at the pleasure of the governor.
Yeah.
You're not going to be, and of course, it's the one Republican that hasn't been reappointed.
So what do you feel Lamont's doing wrong?
I think first he needs to appoint 5 members onto PURA. I wish he didn't make her chairwoman. I think he should pick a different chair because we just need something different. It's not working. Rates have only gone up under this chairperson's watch. They have not gone down.
Is there a path for rates to going down, though? I mean, the
There
cost
is.
of things go up. What's the path?
So one of the biggest problems you're seeing with the public benefits charges is we're putting too much on the electric bill. So we're paying for charging stations. You know, the new proposal is we're going to bury electric lines in Bridgeport and pay $500 million for that just for aesthetic reasons. We're going to add charging stations for heavy-duty trucks, which we all know. I mean, the feds are pulling back on that, but that's a farce. If anyone believes
there's no Mack truck that's going to be electric.
Exactly. But we're going to spend money putting in charging stations for that, and it's going on your electric bill. We've got to stop subsidizing. We have a program where you're paying for other people's electric bills if they can't afford it. It's such a broad definition. They're automatically enrolled into the program if they're receiving TSS benefits. It has ballooned to over $250 million a year right now. This program was just put into place less than 2 years ago. So it has blown up exponentially. We need to rein that in. And those charges don't belong on our electric bills. They belong in a government program, because to assume that you and I could afford to pay someone else's electric bill and subsidize it when we can't pay our own, and people are giving up, food, they're changing their habits in order to support their electric bill, it is a problem.
So what's preventing, every single Democrat says we know how high electric bills are. They all as soon as
and they all voted for the woman that's responsible for raising those rates. Again, it's a complicated system that people need to take the time to understand. And I think a lot of legislators haven't done that. I started looking deep into energy policy about 5 years ago because I suffered the same fate as many people in the legislature. It's too complicated. Let's not get into it. But when you start looking at, for instance, the public benefits charges, which is a third of your bill, you could provide savings there. We created a storm response program that is the Cadillac of storm responses. We should be looking at ways to dial it back to provide savings to ratepayers.
A lot of that was like after Irene. Where
it was a
down
knee-jerk reaction because recovery took too long. So we put things in place now, though, that is too expensive. So, for instance, the utility companies are required to have I think it's a 72-hour turnaround of getting the power back on. So in order to do that, they ramp up before the storm. If we change that analysis and allow for them a little bit more of a buffer of when they need to get in there to start cleanup, they don't have to ramp up as quickly. So you might be 5 days without power versus 3 days without power. But if it saves your electric bills $100 million across the board, I think people might be willing to pay for that.
And also they ramp up many times unnecessarily. So you ramp up in expectation of a thing, but so I know this. So
it could even be bigger. Yep.
I've had restaurants where they would hang out and there'd be trucks lining up the thing.
You're paying
and then
for
no
it.
Storm would come. And they would come from other states or what have you.
And we're all paying for it. And so what's not talked about right now is we have and this is what Senate Bill 4 did, we had $1 billion storm response that is owed to the utility companies that PURA was not letting them recover. So they're earning interest on that. So delaying the recovery cost doesn't help ratepayers. You're just adding to the debt that we're going to have to pay back. What the bill did is now securitized it and turned it into a mortgage payment. So we're going to pay it back over 10 years instead of in year one. which I supported, but we have to reform the system, because if another storm happens, you're going to have another $1 billion to pay for.
You supported the temporary step to fix the current problem, but there's
That's
a reason
right.
that
But we need
exists.
to fix the cause of that disease.
Is there any chance of that happening?
I think so. I think people, they're under a microscope now. So I think you're going to have more conversation. For instance, the cheaper program, they've already reduced the subsidization rates for electric vehicles because, giving a wealthy individual from Fairfield County or Madison $2,500 to buy an electric car that you and I might be paying for that we can't afford doesn't make sense.
I agree.
So
it never made sense. The $7,500 never made sense.
Finally, we're seeing those subsidies being reduced. They still subsidize for lower income people, but now we're not going to subsidize for the wealthy anymore.
No, and most of the new electric cars are Rivians and
Yeah.
they're $80,000, $90,000 cars.
Right.
Yeah, no, it never made sense to me. If you want a Chevy Volt, maybe,
Right.
but not for one of those huge things. Okay, so just talk to me. I mean, having never really sat down and talked to you before, outside of energy, what are your passions? Like, what are the things in the legislature that you're focused on?
I mean, I've always focused on the budget globally. You know, I've looked at those fiscal guardrails. I was one of the authors of that when we put them in place. And so I continue to look at how to improve them and make them better. You know, the tax package that we had worked on, that was the largest tax increase or decrease in history. The premise that we did on that tax package was people have pushed for a progressive income tax. They want the higher brackets to pay more. What I said was let's eliminate the lower brackets. You know, if you're not going to get the rich to pay more, as more wealth is coming in because the stock market is doing so well, why don't we start eliminating the income tax for lower income earners? And that's where both sides of the aisle were able to get together on that proposal and adopt it. You know, those are the things I'd like us to continue to keep doing, because I think we can sort of make it more affordable for the lower and middle class in Connecticut, which are really being squeezed out.
Yeah, I do think if we work to get that housing cost down, though, it would be huge.
That is a huge issue.
I just see there are billboards now I've seen the other day that call this number before you sell your house, and it's a corporate. Like, that's just crazy to me. Like the days of selling your starter home to another starter family are gone, and it's just great. And we've lost Branford, Guilford has lost people to Middletown and other towns because they can't stay in the area. So it's getting a little crazy.
Yeah, and I think for the shore communities certainly have had a much greater impact.
No, especially the Airbnb aspect and that sort of thing. Yeah. All right, interesting. Vin, I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. Those are two big topics that I really wanted to spend some time on because, Medicaid, the problem with both of those topics is it takes time to understand. And the average person is not going to have the time to understand that. And so politically, it becomes advantageous to throw out bumper sticker slogans that the world's coming to an end, as opposed to here's what it is. When I first saw the big, beautiful bill, I said to myself, okay, it seems a little bit crazy. I don't subscribe always to the Republicans' view that just cutting taxes boosts the economy.
Right.
I'm not a big believer in that mentality. But if it forces states to check and make sure, and I have a lot of clients, so I know well retail that the people that are abusing the system, they're all over the place. Kind of drives you crazy because everybody knows who these people are and they're watching them post Facebook pictures of going to Taylor Swift concerts while they're getting free health care and I'm paying your health, that sort of thing. So it would be very good if we looked at that bill instead of this evil, awful thing and said, here's a reason to start looking to, maybe it's not perfect, but a way we can start cracking down on those who should not be getting this and hopefully get people back to work and paying taxes and part of society. Vin, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
If you want to come back again in the near future,
I'd love
maybe
to.
during the session, we'll talk about that a little bit more. For the rest of you, thank you very much. Thanks, Vin, for coming on, and we will be back next week with a new guest. As always, and I always forget this, so I'm kind of reminding myself, like us on YouTube, like us on Facebook, Instagram, all of those things. Any comments? Vin, do you mind answering questions from non-crazy posts that go up there? Vin will get back to you and we'll answer on YouTube if you post that question there. Thanks for joining me on the Steve Mazzacane podcast. We'll see you next time.